My name is Leo. I'm 32 years old, and I restore antique furniture in a small town you've never heard of. An engagement ring I slid onto my wife's finger for the first time was a cheap, plastic thing from a gumball machine, still sticky from a child's discarded candy. That's how I met my wife. In a greasy spoon diner off a highway that led to everywhere and nowhere, with her asking a complete stranger to save her life by pretending to be the man who was going to spend the rest of it with her. And me, a man who had stopped living his own life years ago, saying yes. Let me back up. Before her, my world was silent. It was the quiet hum of a lathe, the scrape of a hand playing over century-old oak, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil. My workshop was my sanctuary and my prison. It was a dusty, quiet place filled with things that were broken, things that had history, things that could be fixed. Unlike people, unlike my father, he had been the life of this place. His laughter used to echo off the high, raftered ceiling. He was a big man with hands calloused from work, but gentle enough to reset the wing of a fallen bird. He taught me everything I knew about wood, about grain, about the soul that lives inside a piece of furniture waiting to be seen again. He also taught me about people. Or he tried to. Son, he told me once, his voice a low rumble as he tightened a clamp on a split chair leg. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be held steady until they can fix themselves. Your job is just to be the brace. I was 16 then. I didn't understand. I thought everything could be fixed with the right tool, enough patience, enough glue. Then, when I was 26, a heart attack took him in the middle of the night. No warning, no chance to fix it, no time to even say goodbye. And the world just switched off. The vibrant colors my father had painted my life with faded to gray. I kept the shop running. I fulfilled the orders. I paid the bills. I existed in the space he had left behind, a ghost in my own life. I ate alone. I slept alone. I worked alone. I stopped wanting things. Friends would call, and I'd let the phone ring. Family would invite me to holidays, and I'd make an excuse. I was the quiet cousin, the distant friend, the man who was good with his hands, but not much else. I was convinced I was the kind who doesn't get a family. The kind who stands on the outside, watching other people live their loud, messy, beautiful lives. I had my work. That was enough. I was just a brace, holding my own broken life together. Or so I thought. For 6 years, that was my reality. A flat line. A quiet, orderly existence of sanding, staining, and sealing. Until Clara. It was a Thursday. I was on my way back from delivering a restored roll-top desk, a 2-day drive. I was tired. The kind of bone-deep tired that comes from too many hours on the road, with only your own thoughts for company. I pulled off the highway into the parking lot of a place called the Silver Fork Diner. It looked like it had been there since the invention of highways. I just wanted coffee and a piece of pie that was probably older than I was. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth. The air smelled of stale coffee and fried bacon. It was comfortable. And then she walked in. She didn't so much walk as she was propelled by a storm of anxiety. She scanned the diner, her eyes wide, frantic. She was looking for something, or someone. Her gaze landed on me, sitting alone in my booth. There was a moment, a split second where our eyes met and the silent, gray world I lived in got a jolt of color. She had eyes the color of moss after a rainstorm. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders as if preparing for a battle, and walked straight towards me. She stopped at my table. She was clutching a small, worn leather purse, so tightly her knuckles were white. "I have a question," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "And it's the strangest question you will ever be asked in your entire life. I need you to just listen before you say no." I just nodded, my coffee forgotten. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." I blinked. The sentence hung in the air between us, thicker than the greasy smell of bacon. "Just for the next 48 hours, she rushed on, words tumbling out of her. "My sister is getting married. My whole family is there. My ex is there. It's complicated. I just need someone. A buffer. A shield. A good, stable man who looks like he wouldn't hurt a fly, but could build a house with his bare hands." She glanced at my hands, resting on the table. calloused, stained, clean but permanently marked by my work. Like you, she whispered. I should have said no. Any sane person would have said no. Any person with a life, with plans, with something to lose would have politely declined and gone back to their coffee. But I was a ghost. Ghosts don't have plans. And something in her moss green eyes looked like a piece of finely crafted furniture that had been dropped from a great height. Shattered. But the quality, the good wood, the beautiful lines, they were still there. My father's voice echoed in my head. Your job is just to be the brace. Okay, I said. The relief that washed over her face was so profound, it was almost painful to watch. It was like watching a dam break. She sagged against the booth, her hand flying to her chest. Really? Yeah, I said. Okay. Her name was Clara. She told me the story in pieces as we drove the last hour to the ridiculously fancy resort where the wedding was being held. My dusty work truck felt comically out of place as we pulled up to the valet, parked between a Porsche and a Mercedes. Her ex-boyfriend, Julian, was the best man. He was from a wealthy, influential family, the kind of family that my own parents had always hoped I'd marry into. They had been engaged, Clara and Julian. Everyone thought they were the perfect couple. But he wasn't perfect. He was a charming bully, publicly charismatic, privately a monster of quiet cruelty and control. When she finally found the strength to leave him, he didn't fight her. He just smiled and started a campaign, a slow, methodical poisoning of the well. He told her family, her friends, everyone, that she was unstable, that she was volatile, that he tried so hard to handle her, but it was impossible. And because he was handsome and rich and charming, they believed him. Her own family. Now, her younger sister, Amy, was getting married. And Julian, ever the magnanimous victim, was the best man, playing the part of the poor, heartbroken man who still cared so deeply for his troubled ex. Clara knew he was going to use the wedding weekend to continue his performance, to paint her as the crazy ex-girlfriend and cement his narrative. I just can't let him ruin this for Amy, she said, her voice small, staring out at the manicured lawns of the resort. If I show up alone, he wins. They'll all look at me with pity. He'll make some comment, some joke at my expense, and I'll be the family tragedy all weekend. But if I show up with someone solid, someone kind, someone who is obviously not intimidated by him, he'll have no power. She looked at me. I just need a brace. She used the exact same word. A brace. My world tilted a little on its axis. So, she said, forcing a brighter tone as we got out of the truck. We need a story. How do we meet? At a diner, I said, shrugging. You asked me to marry you. She laughed, a real, beautiful sound that seemed out of place in the tense air. Okay, maybe not that. Let's see. You're a furniture restorer. That's true. That's good. We can use that. And you're Clara, I said. What do you do? I'm a waitress right now, she said, a flicker of something, shame, regret, in her eyes. I used to be a horticulturalist. I had my own landscape design business, but I had to scale back. We walked towards the grand entrance of the hotel, inventing a life. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing and started actually talking. I told her about my father's workshop, about the smell of wood shavings, about the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. She told me about her love for plants, about how she could see the architecture in a garden, the way a silver birch could complement a stone wall, how different shades of green could be a symphony. She spoke of soil and sunlight with a passion that made her glow. She was an artist just like me. Her medium was just alive. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't a ghost. I was a man, talking to a woman, building a world, even if it was a fake one. If you believe that sometimes the most real things can start with a lie, subscribe to this channel. Because our entire life is built on the foundation of a story that started just like this. The first test came at the rehearsal dinner. We walked into a private dining room that was all crystal and white linen. The conversation stopped. I went to Clara, and then to me. I could feel the judgment, the curiosity. I just kept my hand on the small of her back, a steady, grounding pressure. A woman who had to be Clara's mother descended on us, her smile tight, her eyes like chips of ice. Clara, darling, you didn't tell us you were bringing a guest. Mother, this is Leo, Clara said, her voice impressively steady. My fiancé. The word hung in the air again. This time, it felt heavier, more real. Her mother's eyes raked over me, from my simple, clean work boots to my slightly too worn blazer. I wasn't what she had expected. I wasn't Julian. And then he appeared. Julian was exactly what you'd expect. Tall, handsome, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck. He used a confident charm that felt slick like oil on water. Clara, he said, his voice smooth as velvet. He ignored me completely. You look, well, it was meant to sound like a compliment. It sounded like an assessment, a diagnosis. Julian, she said, her voice cool. You know my fiancé, Leo. He finally turned his eyes to me. He gave me a lazy, dismissive once-over. Lao, right? Claire mentioned you. Said you work with your hands? How quaint. He held out his hand. His grip was firm, a power play. I just met it with a calm, steady pressure. I didn't squeeze back. I didn't yield. I was just there, solid. I do, I said simply. He turned his charm back on, a weapon aimed at our flimsy, invented story. So, where did you two lovebirds meet? Let me guess, she was rescuing a three-legged puppy, and you were building it a custom, artisanal doghouse. He laughed, and a few people around him chuckled nervously. He was trying to paint her as a caricature, a flighty, overly emotional woman. Before Clara could even respond, I answered, my voice quiet but clear. No, I was trying to fix a wobbly table at a diner. She came over and told me I was using the wrong kind of shim. She was right. It was simple. It was mundane. It was believable. And it subtly painted her as competent and observant. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected a fight or a flustered offense. He didn't know what to do with simple, unadorned truth. Well, fake truth. He clapped me on the shoulder. Well, good for you. Taming this one is a full-time job. Glad someone else is finally up for it. And with that parting shot, he moved off into the crowd, leaving a trail of poison in the air. Clara was trembling slightly. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper meant only for her. You okay? She nodded, taking a shaky breath. Thank you. The table's story was perfect. Just telling her story, I said. Later that evening, the moment of seeing happened. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was small, almost invisible. Dinner was a buffet, a lavish spread served by a small army of catering staff who were clearly overwhelmed. I saw Clara watching them, her brow furrowed with a familiar empathy. She excused herself, saying she needed some air. I watched her go. She didn't go outside. She slipped through a side door that led towards the kitchens. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed a few minutes later. I found her in a brightly lit hallway. One of the young waiters, a kid who couldn't have been more than 18, was standing next to a broken catering cart. One of its wheels had snapped off. He looked like he was about to cry. Clara wasn't lecturing him. She wasn't calling for a manager. She was on her knees on the linoleum floor, examining the broken axle. Okay, she was saying softly to the boy. This is fixable, at least for tonight. Do you have any zip ties? The boy shook his head, looking miserable. Clara looked around, her eyes scanning. She then unlooped the silk scarf from around her neck. It was beautiful, patterned with green leaves and ferns. Without a second's hesitation, she began expertly wrapping it around the broken wheel and axle, twisting and knotting it with a surprising strength and precision. She was bracing it, making it functional. She stood up, wiping her hands on her dress. There, she said, smiling at the boy. That should hold for the rest of the night. Just take it slow on the turns. The kid looked at her, his eyes wide with gratitude. Thank you, miss. You didn't have to do that. Nobody has to do anything, she said, her voice gentle. We just choose to. Now go on. They probably need you out there. She thought no one was watching. She thought she was invisible. But I saw her. I saw the truth of her. Not the unstable woman Julian described. Not the difficult daughter her mother seemed to believe in. I saw a woman whose first instinct was to quietly and competently fix what was broken, to help someone who was struggling, to sacrifice a piece of herself, even just a silk scarf, without any need for recognition. She was a restorer, just like me. I slipped back into the dining room before she saw me. When she returned to the table a few minutes later, her hair slightly disheveled, her neck bare, I looked at her differently. This fake engagement didn't feel fake anymore. Not to me. The wedding day was a masterpiece of tension. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the chapel. Amy, Clara's sister, was beautiful. The groom looked nervous and happy. And standing beside him, looking smug and virtuous, was Julian. Throughout the ceremony, I could feel his eyes on us. He was watching for a crack, a misstep, a sign that our relationship was a fraud. I just stood beside Clara, a quiet presence. When her hand trembled, I found it with mine and gave it a gentle squeeze. Where her mother gave her a disapproving look, I stepped slightly in front of her, blocking the line of sight. I was being a brace, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The reception was where I knew the real battle would be fought. It was held in a grand ballroom with chandeliers that dripped crystals like frozen tears. We sat at a table with Clara's parents and a few other relatives. The conversation was stilted. Her father asked me what I did, and when I told him, he gave a polite, dismissive nod and turned away. Her mother spent 10 minutes talking about Julian's new promotion at his father's investment firm. It was a calculated performance of disapproval. Clara just picked at her food, her face a pale, still mask. I wanted to grab her hand, to pull her out of there, to take her back to my quiet workshop where things made sense. But we had to see it through. Then came the toasts. The maid of honor gave a sweet, tearful speech. Then the groom's father. And then the master of ceremonies announced the best man, Julian. He took the microphone, a practiced, easy smile on his face. He started with the usual jokes, charming the crowd. He spoke glowingly of the groom. He praised the bride. And then he turned his attention, ever so subtly, to Clara. To Amy and Tom, he said, raising his glass, they're proof that love can be simple, that it can be stable, that it can be built on a foundation of trust and sanity. The word hung in the air. Sanity. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Clara's mother wouldn't meet her eyes. You see, Julian continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity, not everyone is lucky enough to find that. Some people chase fantasies. They jump from one thing to the next, looking for a quick fix, a temporary solution. They might even show up to a wedding with a rental just to keep up appearances. He looked directly at me. The insult was clear. He was calling me a prop. He was calling her a liar. My blood ran cold. But on the outside, I remained perfectly still. I looked at Clara. A single tear was tracing a path down her cheek. She was trying so hard to hold it together, to not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. My father's voice was a roar in my head now. Your job is just to be the brace. Julian wasn't done, but we wish them well, don't we? We hope they find what they're looking for. We hope they get the help they so clearly need. That was it. The public execution. He had painted her as pathetic and mentally ill in front of her entire family. I had to do something, but a scene would only prove him right. A confrontation would make me look like the aggressive, low-class boyfriend he was painting me as. So I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up and yell. I just stood up quietly. I walked around the table to where Clara was sitting, frozen in her chair. I held out my hand. Julian faltered, his speech stumbling for a second as he saw me move. I believe this is our dance, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady. It cut through his poisonous monologue. Clara looked up at me, her moss-green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She placed her hand in mine. It was cold as ice. I led her to the dance floor. The band, seeing our movement and sensing the shift in the room, instinctively started playing a slow, gentle song. I pulled her close. She buried her face in my shoulder, and I could feel the tremors of her silent sobs. I just held her. I didn't say anything. I just held her steady. We swayed to the music in the center of the room, and the narrative cracked. People weren't looking at Julian anymore. who was standing awkwardly with a microphone in his hand, his charming facade shattered. They were looking at us. They saw his cruelty, and they saw my quiet, protective gesture. They didn't see a crazy woman and her prop. They saw a woman being comforted by a man who clearly loved her. I saw Clara's sister, Amy, watching us. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes as she looked back at Julian. She was finally seeing him. I didn't fix anything in that moment. I just held her steady. After the dance, we slipped out. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. We just walked out of the ballroom, through the grand lobby, and into the cool night air. We didn't speak until we were back in my truck, the familiar smell of sawdust and old coffee a welcome comfort. The pretense was over. The 48 hours were up. I was supposed to drive her home and then drive back to my silent life. The thought was unbearable. I drove for a while in silence, the miles slipping by under the tires. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "For what you did. For everything." "You don't have to thank me," I said. We pulled up in front of her small apartment building. It was a modest place, but every windowsill was overflowing with plants. A little pocket of life in the concrete. This was it. The end of the story. I was supposed to say good night, drive away, and become a ghost again. I couldn't do it. I turned off the engine and looked at her. "This wasn't pretend for me, Clara." The words came out before I could stop them. They were the most honest words I had spoken in 6 years. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face in the dim light of the dashboard. "It wasn't for me either," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to go back," I said, "to the quiet, to being alone." "I don't want you to," she said. And then she told me the rest of the story. The real story. It wasn't just about protecting her own reputation. It was about protecting her sister, Amy. Julian had started to turn his manipulative attention to Amy after Clara left him, trying to isolate the sisters, trying to control the family narrative. Clara's instability was a wall she had let him build, a distraction to keep his focus on her and away from her more vulnerable younger sister. She was taking all the fire so Amy could be safe. It was a quiet, brutal act of self-sacrifice, and no one had ever seen it. Until now. I didn't go home that night. We sat in my truck in front of her apartment and talked until the sun came up. We talked about everything. About my father. About her dreams of opening a small, specialist nursery. About the silence in my life and the noise in hers. At some point during that night, I took her hand. I didn't let go. A few weeks later, her sister called. Amy had confronted Julian about the toast, about his behavior. And without Clara there to act as his target, his charm had cracked, and his ugliness had shown through. The engagement to Amy's new husband was solid, but Amy had seen the truth about Julian. The whole family had. The narrative was broken. The truth was out. Clara had been vindicated, not because she fought for it, but because the brace had held long enough for the truth to set itself. Our life together started to build, slowly and deliberately, like restoring a piece of furniture. At 1 month, she brought a struggling ficus to my workshop. She said it needed a quiet place to recover. She placed it in a sunny spot by the window. At 6 months, my dusty workshop had a corner that was a riot of green. Ferns, succulents, and orchids thrived amongst the wood shavings and oil cans. She had brought life back into the silent space. At 1 year, we were standing in an empty storefront on Main Street. On one side was my workshop. On the other, her new nursery. We had knocked down the wall between them. One evening, we were sitting in the workshop surrounded by the smell of damp earth and fresh-cut pine. I had been working on a small, intricate wooden box. I had been working on it for months. I slid it across the workbench to her. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a ring. It was simple, elegant. A thin band of white gold with a single, small, perfect diamond, like a drop of morning dew. "I know we already have one," I said, gesturing to the plastic gumball machine ring she kept in a little dish on her potting bench. "But I thought maybe we could use a more permanent brace." Her eyes filled with tears, the happy kind this time. She said yes. Of course, she said yes. We kept the plastic ring. It sits on the windowsill in our kitchen, a constant reminder that the strongest things can start in the most fragile, most unexpected, most pretend ways. It's funny, isn't it? My family had always wanted me to marry someone from their world. Someone wealthy, someone with a pedigree, someone who would look good at a country club. They saw Clara, a waitress in a diner, and they saw nothing. They looked, but they didn't see. I looked at Clara that day in the diner, and I saw everything. For the longest time, I thought our story was about how I saved her. I was the brace, the quiet, steady man who showed up and held her world together when it was about to fall apart. That was the story I told myself. But I was wrong. The truth is, she saved me. I was the one who was broken. I was the ghost, haunting the empty rooms of my own life. My heart was a piece of shattered furniture, stored away in a dark, dusty corner, too damaged to even attempt to fix. I had walled myself off from the world, convinced that silence was safety. And then she walked in, with her moss-green eyes and her quiet, fierce strength, and she knocked down the walls. She didn't do it with a grand gesture. She did it quietly, by bringing a plant into my silent workshop, by talking about sunlight and soil, by showing me what it looked like to be strong when the world was trying to tell you that you were weak. She was the brace for me. She held me steady until I could fix myself. She filled my silent world with life again. My father taught me a valuable lesson. He taught me about strength, about patience, about the quiet power of just being there. He taught me that your job is just to be the brace. And what I learned from Clara, my wife, the waitress my family mocked, is that sometimes you don't even know you're the one who is broken until the brace shows up. What do you think? Who really saved whom in this story? Let me know in the comments below. And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Would you have said yes? If a frantic stranger walked up to you in a diner and asked you to change the course of your life for 48 hours, would you have taken that chance? It's a risk, but sometimes the greatest restorations begin with the biggest risks. You just have to be willing to see the potential in what everyone else has written off as broken. That's all for this one. Tap that like button if this story resonated with you. Hit subscribe if you believe that true love often shows up when we've stopped looking for it. And turn on that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. This channel is for everyone who believes in the quiet heroes, the unexpected saviors, and the love that holds us steady. Work with good wood.